Okay, welcome back everyone. As promised, wanted to look at how you would structure an intoxication defense question. I'm going to show initially how to do one for a basic intent offence or offences. So I'm not going to be showing as I I don't show any AQA A-level law pass questions because I'm not allowed to. So here is a question that I have, or a problem scenario that I've created myself, and let's just have a look at that. It would be a good idea perhaps if you had, from my previous video when I discussed the intoxication defence, the flowchart diagram, particularly useful for problem scenarios, and I'll link it again here underneath the excuse me, in the description underneath the video. So I've got here that for a 10 marks question, Jim attends a Christmas party organised by colleagues at work. He drives to the bar and restaurant as he doesn't intend to drink. However, early on in the evening, one of his work colleagues puts pressure on him to drink as it's a Christmas party and have fun, or I should say, and to have fun. Jim reluctantly agrees and during the evening consumes 2 large glasses of red wine. Later, while going to the toilet at the urinal, one of his work colleagues produces some cocaine for him to try in the nearby cubicle. Jim is hesitant but tries some. At the end of the evening, Jim gets in his car, ready to drive home. He feels a little lightheaded but decides he's all right to drive. On his way home, Jim runs through a red light and crashes into another vehicle at high speed. Inside the vehicle, the occupants are teenagers on a night out. One of them, Sam, sustains a broken leg, whereas Dean, who is driving, suffers bruising to their head and chest. So the question I've put here is, advise Jim whether the defence of intoxication will succeed for the injuries to Sam. Now, as this is a 10-mark question, I'm actually explicitly saying what the criminal offences are. So here, Section 20 GBH, and for Dean, the driver, Section 47 ABH, under the Offences Against the Person Act, 1861. So what I would say first of all is, for a 10-mark question, which is for my students what you're going to have next term on intoxication, the question, if you read that first, will indicate what the offence or offences are. Probably for a 10-marker it's one offence, but I've put 2 in for this. However, if we were dealing with a 30-mark exam question, as AQA A-level law like to do, then essentially the only difference is the problem scenario is longer. There are other criminal offences, other topics in there, and you have to, although the exam question doesn't explicitly ask you, you have to find the relevant defences that are within that problem scenario. But essentially, other than that, it's the same approach. So a 10-marker is really just getting you to write a specific portion. So you can look at that diagram flowchart from before, but I think with intoxication, first of all, when you read the problem scenario, have a highlighter pen, highlight any links to intoxication. There's going to be big clues, obvious ones dropped by the examiner. So it might be things like, spends all the evening drinking at the bar, or drinking at home, or, has particular drugs or whatever. So it's going to be quite clear. And I think here, if I can do that, I've got here, he consumes, Jim, 2 glasses of red wine. So I'm going to highlight that in yellow. Okay, and then later on you can see that we also have the issue with cocaine. So I'm going to put this whole sentence just to make sort of contextual sense about his friend producing some cocaine for him to try. He's hesitant but tries some. So that's the first thing. Now what I've put below here is essentially a simplified version of that flowchart you probably have in front of you. And a question we start with is, is the defendant Jim intoxicated? Well, we've just highlighted the key parts here, and he is intoxicated by alcohol, the 2 glasses of red wine, and secondly drugs, which is the cocaine. There are no solvents here. So look for, in the exam question, one or more or combination of those things, okay? And remember, of course, that for AQA law anyway, the assessment objective 2, which is your application, as well as assessment objective 3, which is your analysis, you want to make clear the parts you're picking out of the scenario to support your statements. So we've done that there. Then, of course, is Jim intoxicated voluntarily by his own free will, his own choice, or involuntarily? Again, this will make a big difference to the outcome. If you're following that flowchart from before, you'll know that if it's involuntary, then that provides a complete defence according to the case of Hardy. So there's no fault there on the part of the defendant, unless at any point they have formed the mens rea despite being intoxicated. Now, interestingly for this question, this problem scenario, it's clearly voluntary because Jim is at this Christmas party, and despite the pressure put upon him by his work colleagues, in 2 instances here, he chooses freely to drink that wine and to take that drug, the cocaine. So we are dealing with intoxicated. So I'm just going to put here as an aid sort of memoir. I'm going to put yes. I'm going to put yes, voluntary, so you can see how I'm going along here. So there. And then the key part to end on, is it a specific or basic intent offence? Now, there are 2 distinct outcomes for the defence based on this. Now, if it's a specific intent offence, and you'll remember from my previous video, these are offences by which you can categorise them with their mens rea as being intent only. You can only commit them intentionally, like murder, for example, or Section 18 GBH. That will mean that the defence can potentially fall back to a basic intent offence, which would be a lesser offence and subsequently a lesser sentence, which is the benefit the defendant has. It's not a complete defence. But for this question, we're dealing with basic intent offences, as I've made quite clear, because it's only a 10 marker, as I said. A 30 marker, you'd have to work this all out yourself. Because the offences of Section 20 GBH and Section 47 ABH, these are offences by which, if you look at the mens rea, they can be committed subjectively recklessly. Subjective, remember, means that for the person to be liable, the prosecution needs to prove that Jim knew that he was taking an unjustified risk, but went ahead anyway. So for Section 20 GBH, with regards to Sam, this is the broken leg we've got there in the subsequent crash, the mens rea would be that the defendant intentionally or subjectively recklessly causes some harm. Whereas with Dean, Section 47 ABH, if you look up the mens rea, it will be that the defendant intentionally or subjectively recklessly commits an assault or battery. So what I've put down here is, clearly basic intent offence for public policy reasons, remember. I said this in my previous video, which is where the law, unlike the other capacity defences, is trying to find a balance. And the useful AO3, assessment objective 3, analytical and evaluative comment we could make here is the public policy reason is they do not want to have a position where defendant can be intoxicated, commit a crime and have a full defence, because it would not protect the public or indeed offer any justice. There would be no confidence in the criminal justice system if all it took was someone to say, yeah, I was drinking, and there's a complete defence there. So there is trying to be a balance here. And I went on in my previous video to discuss how with basic intent offences, the prosecution only need to prove, at the very least, the lower end of the mens rea, which is, as I mentioned, the recklessness part. So by the fact that, in this case, Jim, in our problem scenario, has voluntarily going to this party, drunk two large glasses of red wine, and taken a drug, cocaine, he is demonstrating to us a reckless course of action. And so the prosecution automatically, it's very easy to prove that he was reckless in committing these two offences, and therefore there is no defence, because the law wants to protect the public. And I put there the case of Majewski, that's how we pronounce it, Majewski, as the key case to illustrate basic intent offences not succeeding with this defence. Very briefly, Majewski, if you look back at your notes, you'll find I think the defendant spent a time consuming alcohol, and I think there was a drug involved as well, and then went to a public house, a pub, and there was started a fight, police were involved, and he then assaulted some police officers, and essentially that just demonstrates all of those things. So whether it's if it's a 30 marker, you're going to have to work out whether the offence is basic or specific, but because I've said it's basic and it's a 10 marker, we've got them just down here. So that's my plan, really, from the flowchart that we had. Now, we already know then, because we have to do all the workings out, that if it's a basic intent offence, he has no defence. So what I've done, just below, I think I've hidden it, so I'm just going to highlight it again, is, there we are, this is my answer. This is my answer to the exam scenario above. Again, copy of that will be available in the description with the video. So I've put here automatically. Normally, I'm very formulaic, but when I write, I like to do a first sentence that says, defendant's name, in this case Jim. He may be able to use the defence, but because we've worked this out, that it's a basic intent offences, he won't be. So I've started with Jim will not be able to successfully use the defence of intoxication, which is a common law defence. Okay? So that's my starting point. And by saying whether the defence is statutory or common law, then we just follow our flowchart essentially. So I put here, Jim must be intoxicated, which he was by alcohol with consuming 2 large glasses of red wine, and by drugs when he used the cocaine in the cubicle. So that's me essentially answering this bit up here. Was he intoxicated? Okay, so that's the first part. I also felt like just putting there for my application and analysis that the scenario also mentions he was left him feeling lightheaded. So I put that in there too. Now, I've done this all as one paragraph, but I separate it just for a moment. The next part is I want to say whether it was done voluntarily or involuntarily. And I put here, despite his reluctance and peer pressure, this was voluntary intoxication by Jim. He chose to become intoxicated. So that's really all I want to put for that. So let's separate that for a second. So all we're left with is determining basic or specific intent offences have been committed here. Well, because this is a 10-mark question, as I said earlier, we already know this, don't we? Basic. So that forms the basis of my last part here of the paragraph, probably where I'm doing most of the writing. So you need to, as part of, for AQA certainly, and assessment objective 1, knowledge and understanding, you need to explain the if you will, the sort of the mens rea of the offences, just to be clear. So here we go. I put here that both of those offences are basic intent for the broken leg and the bruising, and then I go in to define, as I think you should, what a basic intent offence is So I've put that there. A basic intent offence is where the mens rea, remembering, of course, in the exam you are allowed to put the abbreviations MR for mens rea, for AQA. Where the mens rea of the criminal offence can be committed subjectively recklessly. And then I felt like, as part of my analysis and explanation, I wanted just to explain that. So I put there saying, this means the defendant knows they're taking an unjustified risk, but go ahead with it anyway. So I've explained what a basic intent offence is. Now what I need to do is to make it clear to the examiner that both section 20 and section 47 are indeed basic. So I've put here, section 20 has the mens rea of the defendant intentionally or subjectively recklessly causing some harm. I'm only going to sort of bracket my cases. I don't really need to explain them any further. Perhaps if the problem scenario was similar to any of those cases we've learned, then I might go into the facts more, but I'm really just using it to support the ratio, the point of law. So, Parmenter, the mens rea of section 47 ABH, as I said earlier, is the intentional or subjectively recklessly commits an assault or battery. Excuse me. And then we've got here, forgive me, I think I'm going to put in the case of Roberts, which is the case we used to support that mens rea. And then I put, Jim has committed a battery, the application of unlawful force through an indirect act, namely the vehicle. So I'm going to put in here, the application through an indirect act using his car. And I put there DPP and K because that case, if we look back for battery, illustrates how the defendant is liable even though they didn't directly touch the victim themselves, but through indirect means. And here, if you recall, it was when a student who stole some acid from a science lab at his school hid the jar of whether it was sulfuric acid, I think in a hand dryer in the sort of boys' toilets. And then, of course, when another student came and used it, was burned by the acid. So I've just put there DPP and K. I didn't feel the need to really explain the case facts of that any fully. And then I've got here, when his car ran the red light and hit Dean's vehicle. So that's really me applying back to the problem scenario. I'm making it clear when the battery took place indirectly. Indirect act. And then I put here, consequently, as the prosecution only need to prove that Jim was reckless, his action of getting voluntarily intoxicated is a reckless course of action, and he'll be unable to use the defence and will be liable for these offences. So that then ties back to the he will not be successful. Just looking at briefly, is there anything else I potentially want to add? Well, I haven't, have I? I was going to say, I could tie it back to the bruising part here. So, let's see. The mens rea is that the intention to commits an unlawful act. So actually, I think I should have put in here, ABH was committed when the car crash caused, I think we had here Dean the driver, caused Dean to suffer bruising, which interferes with his health